Hello everybody, welcome to the Am IT Geek YouTube channel. My name is Shabazz Dar and always I am the IT Geek. And as you can see, I am joined again by Simon Lee. Hi Simon.
Hi Shabazz, how are we?
Not bad mate, how are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. Looking forward to the next session.
Yeah, you've had a week for it all to sort of muzzle in there, mate. How are you feeling it? Are you all right? Still remembering what I told you last week?
Yeah.
Excellent, top man. So again, just Simon's introduced himself a few times now. People must know who he is by now, but I will have all his socials in the description. If you're not already following him, by all means, make sure you do. There's some great content on his Hyper-V Lab blog as well. So, and you will be seeing a lot more of Simon, hopefully, doing some more video content, hopefully. So, before we get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor of the WVD Zero to Hero series, PolicyPak.
So a massive thank you to our sponsor for this video series, PolicyPak. PolicyPak is a modern desktop management platform for the anywhere workforce. PolicyPak provides a powerful policy creation, management and deployment framework that extends the policy management, security, automation and reporting capabilities found within Windows Active Directory, Unified Endpoint Management Solutions, MDM providers, virtualization platforms, and cloud services. PolicyPak comes with packs, each with its own set of customizable policies that enables IT and teams to solve today's most significant desktop management challenges like remote work, Windows 10 management, GPO sprawl, ransomware, group policy management and more. PolicyPak lowers IT costs, increases security, improves compliance, reduces GPOs and puts the IT admin back in charge. PolicyPak has hundreds of customers, over 1 million deployed seats and has incorporated 5,000 recognised company and a G2 crowd high performer. For more information, visit www.policypak.com or you can follow them on Twitter @PolicyPak. Of course, as normal, all their links will be in the description of the video.
So yeah, massive thank you to our sponsors, PolicyPak. By all means, go check them out. So let's get started. So yeah, this is a collaboration between myself, Shabazz Dar, and Simon Lee. So today's episode is episode 3, and it is planning for WVD. So last week, if you remember, Simon, we did a bit of an overview. We did a bit of a very high level overview really of WVD, what it is, some of the prerequisite requirements, operating systems that are supported. So again, at a very high level. What we're looking at this week, mate, is more of the ecosystem that supports WVD. So what we're going to touch on today is the networking aspect, because we need to make sure we get that right. And there are a lot of reasons for that, which I will go into shortly. We're going to look at identity and security. Again, if you think about cloud, everything sits on top of the identity. It doesn't matter if it's SaaS, PaaS, or IaaS. Your identity is linked to all of those. So we'll discuss identity and security. And then I want to touch on VM sizing. Again, this is something that you have to get right, because the last thing you want is, you've done your deployment, you're well chuffed with yourself, and 6 weeks down the line, people are complaining about performance issues. So VM sizing is important, and I'll just discuss what my own experience is with VM sizing and how I've done it. Image creation, I think I've touched on it in every episode so far. It's only episode 3, but I've mentioned it quite a bit. Making sure we get the image creation right, and the reason why I'm rambling on about it is because it's caught me out. And for any organisation, making sure that they have a unified image across the board of all their EUC platform, be it physical laptops or virtual VDI, it's important. So we are going to be looking at that. Finally, applications. We need to make sure we understand, do your applications support VDI platforms? What sort of identity do we need? Have you got legacy apps that need more of a traditional, Kerber or NTLM authentication? Are there applications that support Azure AD that you can migrate at the same time away from on-premises? Lots of things. So we'll touch on that from a planning aspect again. So again, still a bit of theory, mate, unfortunately, but I think it's important that you understand all this before, you know, I believe episode 4 will be getting a bit hands-on, but again, I want to make sure we cover everything.
Sure.
So networking, I know what you're thinking. It's always the network. It's always DNS. Anyway, it's always both of them as far as I'm concerned. Networking is very important, mate. You know, the network size, the size of the VNet. So the VNet is essentially the name of the virtual network within Azure. So understanding what size network we're going to deploy and what size VNet is vitally important. I'll explain to you why. Cloud, and I include Amazon in this as well, public cloud, my experience with it is that their best practice or recommendation, and recommendation with the keyword again, is having a larger VNet. So what they call a /16 subnet. For any of those people that aren't familiar with networking, that, you know, slash notation is like your subnet. And that's a 255.255.0.0 subnet. And that is an absolute ridiculous amount of subnets and available IP addresses. So, and I, in the past, again, when I was a bit more naive, I kind of followed that best practice, and it's caught me out a lot of times. Because why, if you don't need to have that many, you know, available IP addresses, why use them? Because all that's going to happen is at some point down the line, if you keep on creating more and more subnets for the sake of it, they'll end up clashing with either a partner that you want to do a VPN with, or an on-premises subnet, or it can cause more problems. And again, it's something that I've learned the hard way, unfortunately. How many subnets are we going to have? How many subnets do we need? If you think about it, let's think normal about it now. So if for your actual Azure infrastructure, your virtual machines, your host pools, you'll need a VNet. You'll need a subnet, sorry. So your VNet is your overarching network, and your subnet is think of it as an on-premise network, if you will. You'll need a subnet for your virtual machines. You probably need it if you're going to integrate it with on-premises or another public cloud. You'll need a gateway subnet for that. If you're talking about management purposes, you might want to provision a Bastion host. So you'll need a Bastion subnet for that. So there's 3 potential subnets there. And you might actually want to put your, again, for segregation, you might want to actually, we're going to get into identity shortly, but if you provision Azure AD domain services, you might want a separate subnet for that as well. So again, it just depends what your needs are. There's 4 subnets I've put there. And with something like a smaller VNet size, maybe a /20, that'll accommodate that. So again, those are like ifs. You know, you might want to put your Azure AD domain service on a different. I can't think of a reason why you want to do that, but you might want to for whatever reason. But you only need 2-3 subnets at most. And again, with your like your Bastion subnet and your gateway subnet, they only need to be small subnets. They don't need to be /24. You don't need 256 IP addresses. You only really need maybe, you know, like a /28 or a 27. So how many subnets do you need to make sure that's documented and planned out? What size subnets? We've just spoken about that. That's vitally important as well. Like I said, I had an experience where it was AWS this time. I was doing workspaces, and I provisioned a /16 subnet, and I created a number of subnets for the sake of it. Literally 6 months down the line, they needed a site-to-site VPN with a partner of theirs, but the subnets were clashing, and the VNet was clashing with their partner. Yeah. So that caused a massive problem.
Yeah.
So we need
How did you get around it?
We didn't. We didn't. We didn't. We couldn't do it. They had to figure out another way of sharing data, essentially. But what I learned from that is it needs more planning. Just because Microsoft, Amazon give you a recommendation doesn't mean you should take it. That's a recommendation. We need to think about what the organization that we're doing this work for, what are their requirements. Yeah. There's no wrong or right answer with this sort of stuff. It's what your customer needs. That's the right answer, whatever your customer needs. If they need Flash 16 subnet, fair enough, go at it. But if they don't do it, in my opinion, and I've been burnt before. The IP range is very important as well. You know, you might think, oh, just put anything on it, 10.10.0.1 and etc. But again, you got to make sure it doesn't clash with anything. You might have VPNs already set up with partners. And if that's the case, document what their IP ranges are and don't clash with them. Pick something different. If if your on-premises network is 192.168.10.0/24, don't have a 192.168 subnet. Pick something totally different, like 172, or obviously make sure it's a class C subnet. Again, apologies if you're not familiar with networking. To provision WVD, you really do need at least a basic understanding of networking. So I'm making maybe unfairly, I'm making the assumption that people know about subnets and stuff like that. If you don't, I'm more than happy to share some more information on that. But for the purpose of the videos, I'm going to assume people do know their networking. Making sure you pick what's the right word I'm going to look for? A sensible IP range. It's very important, mate. And again, just think of it as an on-premises. When you're configuring your network on premises or a new VLAN on premises, you pick a VLAN that don't clash with anything, don't you? It's just basic networking. So the same applies here. Okay. Any questions at the moment? You all good?
No, we're all good so far.
Okay. I bet you never thought this would be so in depth around what I thought. I'm just going to look at host pools and WVD. There's so much more to it there. And I hope you
definitely. Yeah, no, it's good. And it's like you say, to do it right, you have to understand like all the underlying infrastructure, like we were saying about from like an RDS standpoint from on-premise. You've got to build your host with the Hyper-V and configure all the OS before you can get into deploying everything else on top. So
yeah, it's again, there's no right or I'm not saying to people this is the right or wrong way to do it. This is what my experience has shown me. I've done multiple deployments, and it's something that I feel like I've got enough experience in to share with people. That's all this is, man. I'm just sharing my experience with you. This is not do it this way because I said so. This is my way is the right way. Maybe there's people watching this video that have done more experience than me. By all means, if anyone has a comment, I love people to give me their ideas. Well, we did it this way. I'd love to hear other people's stories about, war stories about how they. So by all means, anybody watching wants to share their story, please do. I'd love to hear it. Moving on, mate. Identity and security. Again, vitally important aspects of any deployment in the cloud, and WVD is no different. Azure Active Directory or Azure AD Domain Services. Sorry, Active Directory or Azure AD Domain Services. Azure AD doesn't actually come into it technically. Well, it does, but I'll explain why. So, we talked about on-premises integration.
Yeah.
If you're a business that relies heavily on group policy and you lock your Windows image down through group policy, you've not maybe integrated to Intune or using any of those policies, then integrating WVD, your host pools, your session hosts with the Active Directory is going to be vitally important. So you'll need to, with a VPN, and as I'll show you what you do with to make that work. Well, actually, let me ask you a question because then you'll answer this question. If you want to add your you want to add an on-premises laptop to the domain.
Yeah.
What setting? Don't worry if you don't know. It's a trick question. What network setting has to be correct for your laptop on-premises to see your domain controller?
I'm going to take a stab and say, is it the Windows firewall profile?
No, it's 3 letters. 3 letters. It's always its fault.
DNS.
DNS. So your laptop on premises needs to be able to see your domain from a DNS perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And cloud is no different. So let's use an example. We've got a site-to-site VPN set up. Our cloud infrastructure can, from a network perspective, talk to our on-premises. So if you ping a server on-prem from the cloud, you'll reply and you'll get successful replies. Now, if you want to domain join, because that's what you have to do with your session host, you have to domain join them, which will obviously go into more detail further down the line. Your network, your VNet, has to point its DNS to your domain controllers. So as I'll show you when we provision the network, or when we provision WVD, there's a DNS option within your VNet, and all you do is you customize that and add the IP addresses for your domain controllers. So that way, when your session hosts are trying to join the domain, they will do a DNS lookup for the on-prem. They'll be able to see it because the DNS is already pointing there. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
It'll make even more sense when I actually show you. But again, we're not quite there yet. We will go into that. So Azure AD Domain Services, for those that don't know what that is essentially a domain controller service. So it's AD as a service essentially. So in the back end, it's domain controllers, but they're managed by Microsoft. And you essentially, when you provision it, you get 2 IP addresses within your subnet, whatever subnet you assign the service to. And they will, again, if you're using Azure AD Domain Services, the same way you point your VNet to your Active Directory on premises, you would do the same if you're using Azure AD Domain Services. Those 2 IP addresses that you get when it's provisioned, you add those to your VNet DNS. Yeah. Now, I put a question mark at the end of that because again, there's no right or wrong answer. The first deployment I did, they heavily used. It was an NHS trust, and they heavily used group policy, so they had to have that integration. We did the site-to-site VPN, and we pointed DNS to our premises AD. If they don't have that requirement, I normally try and, I don't want to say push, I normally try and guide my clients towards Azure AD Domain Services. I'll tell you why. Although, in my opinion, as a service, it's not quite as full-on as AD on premises. When you integrate with on-premises, you have a reliance on something, which is that VPN.
Yeah.
If that VPN goes down, your session hosts essentially can't authenticate. Users won't be able to log in. You get me? So that is a single point of failure, and that's what I try and explain to my clients and people who, when I'm doing demos, that for me there's that it mitigates a lot of risk, and that's how I try and approach my deployments. I look at the risk involved, weigh them up, and then I'll say, well, this has the pros, this has these cons, this has these pros, and this has those cons. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So identity massively important. Now, I mentioned Azure AD doesn't really come into it. Technically, it does. Now, as you're probably aware, or you might not be aware, Active Directory can integrate with Azure AD through Azure AD Sync. Now, when you provision Azure AD Domain Services, that automatically syncs with Azure AD as well. So before you provision ADDS, you have to have an Azure AD tenancy. The thing is, say that, okay, I'll use my domain, amitgeek.com. Okay, I've got a domain controller that has a parent domain as amitgeek.com. That synchronizes with Azure AD. So I've got that sync. So technically, in Microsoft 365 Azure AD, I've also got amitgeek.com. When I create my Azure AD Domain Services tenant, that's provisioned with the domain amitgeek.com. But it technically it's classed as a separate domain to my on-premises. They have no link to each other from a domain controller, from a domain perspective. The only thing they have is they have 2 separate syncs with Azure AD. So just keep that in mind. If for some people might provision, I've heard of it, people provision an Active Directory domain server in Azure. So you put a domain, a physical, I'll call it physical, you put a virtual machine, Windows virtual machine. If you've got that, but you still want to have integrate Azure AD Domain Services, your Azure AD Domain Services has to be on a totally separate VNet to your domain controller, because they can't be, because it sees it as a new, it says, oh, well, you've already got this domain provisioned on this network, you can't provision it again. So just something to keep it, it's a little gotcha there. We'll go into more of that when we start delving into some more hands-on, mate.
Sure.
Please do let me know if I'm totally blagging your head with too much information.
No, that all makes sense from like a connectivity standpoint and from domain and DNS standpoint. So yeah, we're good.
I get excited when I talk about these topics. I sometimes just go off on them. Do tell me to slow down if you want. MFA, multi-factor authentication, fully integrates with WVD through conditional access. And again, because this connects, so essentially the WVD service, you're connecting over the internet. Don't matter if you're connecting from on premises or from home or from a Costa Cafe or McDonald's, you're doing it over the internet. So having that extra layer of security for identity, in my opinion, is very important. So that's something that needs to be thought of and planned, and how you're going to deploy that, because it might be that, again, I've had it where a company, an organization isn't using MFA.
Yeah.
So if it's new to them, if it's new to the users, you need to think about training, documentation for them, guides, all that sort of stuff you need to think about. And that's just additional time in the project. So make sure you keep that in mind. MFA. Conditional access, again, I suppose that can be counted as MFA because you provision your MFA through your conditional access policy. But as well as that, you can do conditional access policies to control, I suppose you could control what users can do with WVD. Can they, from their WVD instance or from their WVD remote access, can they download data from it? Can they copy data across to their local machine? Yes or no?
Yeah.
It all very much depends on what the security policy of the organization. But just know that you can have, it does fully integrate with conditional access, so you can have more control over what users can and cannot do, and also where users can and cannot connect from. So I won't go too much into conditional access because I suppose that's a totally different topic of its own. I have done a video on conditional access, I think, within my channel. So if anyone's watching that want to know more about conditional access, by all means, have a look at that. Oh, trigger finger. Security Center, Azure Security Center. So again, from a security monitoring perspective, remember that WVD is infrastructure. So it's infrastructure. It comes under the infrastructure as a service, even though the biggest argument I've heard, what is WVD? Is it an EUC platform or is it a cloud Azure, infrastructure platform? It's a bit of both, I suppose. It is part of the modern workplace, but it's also infrastructure. So you can fully integrate with Azure Security Center. So making sure you sort of plan for that and what policies you want to implement there is quite important as well. Endpoint protection is the last thing. For any Windows 10 or EUC deployment, making sure you have your Windows 10 or your session host protected from a AV perspective is vitally important. Again, you might use a third-party tool already for your on-premises laptops. You want to integrate that to WVD. Fair enough. It does integrate with third-party vendors. You might, if you've already got those sort of subscriptions like the E3 or E5, you might want to use Defender for endpoint. So again, you've got choices, but just make sure you think about that and make sure you do add that as part of your image, which obviously we're going to. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Marvelous. VM sizing. So I've touched on this a few times already. Making sure that we size the VM. If you think about, you give someone a laptop and 6 months down the line, it's too slow. Same here, mate. You could have think, for the time you've sized it correctly, because you follow like Microsoft guides or whatever. But making sure you size it is very important. So just before we get on with this slide, Simon, I want to quickly share. So there's a Microsoft Docs site, which it has like a multi-session recommendations. So again, it's best practice recommendations, I suppose, is the best one. So I've got them on screen now. So if you look at here, they've got, this table here shows examples of smaller proof of concept scenarios with user workloads less than 20 users. So again, these are recommendations. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong, or you should go by these. Don't take these as gospel. But and what classes is there? Again, my argument for these would be: what classes is a light workload, medium workload, heavy, power?
Yeah.
What do you class as that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But essentially, these are the sorts of, let's look at a light workload, maximum users per for vCPU 4, and RAM OS storage minimum 4 vCPU, 16 gig RAM, 32 gig storage. The example it gives is 4 users per CPU, and those are the sizes it recommends.
Yeah.
So, and again, it goes on shows examples of standard or larger workloads. So, if your light workload is a bit larger than normal, again, I would only use these sort of recommendations for a POC.
Yeah.
If I flick back quickly to the presentation, I will give you some ideas around what I've done in the past as far as sizing goes. So, sorry to flick between screens, mate, but I just like that's something I want to show you is available. You can just Google WVD sizing, and it'll come up, VM sizing.
Okay.
So, how do I size my session host? Right now, it's not as simple as licking your finger and putting it in the air. Unfortunately, what I've done is proof of concepts. I always try and, as part of my deployment, I always try and do a proof of concept, and there's loads of arguments for it. It gives you a chance to test applications, because every organization says, if you're lucky enough, they might just use Office, but it's very rare that happens these days. They might have
definitely.
They might have engineering apps. So doing a proof of concept is in my opinion, is important, and I always try and include. It don't have to be a long proof of concept; could be a couple of weeks, but that proof of concept tests a lot of aspects. One of them being the VM sizing. So as I mentioned, it gives you a chance to test applications on the VMs, and see how they react and how they work. And again, in your POC, make it as like for like as you can as your production goes. So I mean, like integrating with data on premises, exactly how your production would look. Put it in your proof of concept. Yeah, all it is your proof of concept will only be for a select amount of users. It might be that the same proof of concept ends up being turned into a production. You just scale out and add more sessions. You know what I mean? So, but a POC to test applications and how they react to the VM size you've chosen is very important. So what I've done in the past is I've used Azure Monitor dashboards to essentially look at performance metrics. That integrates obviously with log analytics as well. And so what you'll do is you'll get a set of users, say 10 users, to do just work on WVD for a day. Work on it in anger, use the applications, even if it's low, that just say, look, you might have performance issues, blah blah. And then when they've done that at the end of the day, review your Azure Monitor, export that into reports, look at the performance. Okay, I can see that we had a spike around this time. And you can basically work with the POC group or the test pilot group to understand what they were doing at that time. So again, that's something that I've done in the past myself, and I definitely recommend it from during your POC. And again, as we're towards the end, we're going to talk about monitoring. This Azure Monitor dashboards will be part of that. We're going to do a custom dashboard deployment.
Cool.
And I showed you earlier. By all means, use the Microsoft guidelines as a guideline. Do not take them as gospel. Microsoft Docs have massively improved, and I think it's great they have that sort of information out there. But in my experience, the guidelines are just recommendations to give you a starting point. What you need to do is you need to build on top of that and start. So the POC, put those sizes in. But then you start looking, right, okay, we've had massive performance issues. Let's go 2 sizes up. See what I mean? And then you go, right, on average, we've got about 5 users, or I'll use around number 10 users per session host, performing well. So say we've got 100 users, we know we need to provision 10 of that VM size. Use Microsoft guidelines by all means.
Sure, okay.
So far, so good?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Just need to check me. I want to make sure I'm not black in your head.
No, it all makes sense, definitely.
Marvelous. Imaging, again, making sure you plan your image, vitally important. There's many aspects that we need to think about. What OS am I going to use? As I mentioned in the last episode, there's various operating systems. I've only ever done Windows 10 in my experience with WVD. And with it, I think that's one of the drives for people. I've not done anybody on a Windows Server OS in WVD yet.
Okay.
If people have got the option for Windows 10, I think people are going for that.
Yeah.
So that's vitally important, and again, making sure we use the right OS of Windows 10, as I mentioned, multi-session or enterprise.
Yeah.
So make sure you get that right in your image. What apps are going to be on your image? Do you have applications that are globally used? So again, a common one is Office, or Office for Enterprise apps, I suppose they'll call it in Microsoft Cloud world. But you know, Office is normally a go-to has to be on the image because everyone uses it essentially.
Yeah.
But again, you might have line of business apps that everyone uses. You might have more than one image as well, Simon. You could have like an image for different departments. So the global image department might have certain, different applications. So again, got to be flexible and there's no right or wrong way to do this. Again, I'm going to keep on saying that throughout this series. There is no right or wrong way to do all this. The right way is what the customer requires. Image version control. Now, this is massively important. The reason for that is because when you come to update imaging, and we are going to look at image updates when we do the practical side, you need to make sure that when you create that brand new image, when you're essentially when you're capturing it, you make sure you need to give it the right version number, because the first image you create is going to be version 1. Every time you make a new image to that session host, that host pool, it's going to be the next version up. And when it captures that image, any new session host that you deploy will take the latest image. So they won't take version 1, they'll take version 2 if that's the last one you did. So making sure you use image control, image version control is massively important and needs to be planned. Finally, an update schedule. Obviously, traditionally with on-premises laptops and Windows 10 and servers, you do everyone knows about Patch Tuesday. You normally have a pilot group, and then you would, once your pilot groups have the updates for a few days or a few weeks, and you deploy your updates maybe once or twice a month. Also once a month or once every couple of months. With WVD, and again in my experience, I've not done image updates every month. It's more of I'd say a quarterly thing that I've normally done. That's not to say that it doesn't mean you can't patch them. By all means, you can patch them using Windows Update for Business, for example, because it's got full integration with, well, not full integration, sorry, but it does have integration with Endpoint Manager. So you could, but I'm on about for like maybe application updates. There might be a new app that you want to test and put onto that, rather than installing the application on every session host. Upload your image. If you want to go to say there's a new build of Windows 10 coming out, what's the latest? 20H2, is that the latest, or is there another one after that? 21 or something like that?
There's 21H1, I think, is the latest.
So, for example, when you've got a massive feature update like that, don't update each session host VM. Update your image. So again, making sure you have a schedule for image updating and make sure your customers are aware of that and they're happy with that. That's the other important bit as well that I would touch on, image control and making sure you manage your image correctly. Applications. Making sure we understand, what applications are we going to publish? Like I said, Office is quite a common one where you would put that on the image. However, you might have a use case, Simon, where you've got users who need access to Office, but they don't need access to Windows. They might be part-time staff that just need to access email. Or, for example, say that you have delivery people, your logistics company, and you only got people who need access to email. Rather than giving them a full Windows desktop, you might just give them access to a published app of Outlook. That might be a use case. So again, understanding what your clients' needs are and what applications they want to publish. do you have any legacy apps? What if you have your legacy apps? Can they be migrated to cloud apps, or do you need to integrate those somehow with WVD, so the legacy on premises? And that's where other discussions come in. Do you need to, if you're having transitioning away from on-premises services, you need to create a virtual machine, a server to accommodate those legacy apps. And again, just understanding if you have any legacy apps and how you're going to integrate those into your deployment is massively important as well. MSIX app attach. That's something that's coming to AVD recently. So do your app support that? So this is just another way of publishing an app, and we will go into this more in the application episode that we're doing in the series towards the end.
Yeah.
But understanding what applications support this, and is there a need for it? Do you want to deploy the application through MSIX app attach? And that has a whole different. You can integrate as your files and store them on there. So you don't publish them specifically through WVD. But there is integration with it, and there is within a WVD service there is a bit for MSIX app attach which you can add. So we'll go into that more close to the time.
Yeah.
And that's this episode done, mate.
Cool.
Again, I've gone through a lot, mate. You probably have a few questions.
I was going to say, that is a lot to go away and digest.
Sorry.
No, in a good way, honestly. But yeah, it's like you say, it's just covering like the core principles and building the foundation for your WVD platform. And like you say, there's multiple different ways you can spin it. You can either do it from a hybrid perspective, or you can go all fully cloud. It's like you say, it's a case-by-case scenario.
So I mean, Simon, obviously, I appreciate that's a lot to digest. I hope I went through it a bit slowly, so obviously you can watch the recording back when you get time. Have you got any specific questions that might have popped into your head? Maybe I've missed some that you've thought of that you might want to just ask about?
Yes. So from like a IT ops time-saving perspective, everyone likes to automate things.
Oh, yeah.
What platforms can we use to automate this? So it's either zero touch or with light touch.
Very good question. Very good question. So with it being infrastructure, as I mentioned, WVD is virtual machines and networking and stuff like that. It fully integrates with Terraform. So for those who are aware, infrastructure as code. The Terraform and Ansible fully integrates with those. So Terraform is the tool that you, I suppose, would use to provision the network, the infrastructure. So the resource group, the subscription, the network and the virtual machines. Ansible is probably the tool you'd use to complete those repeatable tasks. So by that I mean, say that you've got 100 VMs, you want a domain join, you'd use Ansible for that. Mm-hmm. So, to answer your question, yes, mate, you can do that with Terraform. If we get enough comments in the comment section of the video, we can do, after we've done the series, we can do a bonus episode where we deploy from Terraform. So if we get enough comments, enough likes, I will do something on that, mate. So that's a really good question. Thank you.
Cool. Nice. Cheers. Thanks, Shabazz.
So that completes episode 3. Again, just to recap, it was more of a planning, just to make you understand from a planning perspective what we need to do. We need to think about the network, identity, security, imaging, applications, all that side of it we need to think about. By all means, if anything pops into your head, mate, for the next episode, by all means, come back to it. We can always answer it. For those people that are watching, if you guys have any questions, by all means, ping me on Twitter, leave me a comment. So I'm always happy to have an open discussion about these topics. So thank you very much again, Simon. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, thank you and goodbye.
Bye.